So when we work with queries, we're asking questions about the data that we may have in a database. One of the first things that you want to make sure that you do is look at the data that's in the tables so that you know where certain fields exist and what those tables are about so that you know how to go about locating that data. We're going to be working with the Skyline database, and so we'll see that we have 6 tables. We have the banquets table. So if I double click that, that will open it up in datasheet view. Notice the fields: reservation ID, employee ID, reservation date, first name, last name, telephone, event ID, total amount, amount paid and confirmed. This is an example of a yes/no field. If it's checked, it's yes. If it's not checked, it's no. So each table has to have a unique identifier. If you want to double check what the unique identifier is, simply switch to design view. And you'll notice that the primary key is set in this table on reservation ID, so that that field is unique to that particular field in the table. And then if you click on the icon under the View tab again, it takes you back to your datasheet view. I'm going to quickly double click on each one of the remaining tables, and I'm going to notice in there the information. Notice here in the employees table we have F name and L name for first name and last name. If we look in design view, it's simply so that we can keep it straight from banquets. Employee ID is the primary key field. For the rest of the tables, I will let you know that it is the first field in each table that is the primary key field. So we'll take a look at events. I'll take a look at the inventory having to do with the items they're ordering, the orders that they need to order, and then who's supplying that inventory to them. Notice that each table is only about a specific thing. You don't overlap your data within the tables. The next thing that we have to do is make sure that we have relationships created, because that's the power of Access, is being able to create those relationships. If you take a look at the database tools, you have a relationships button. When you click on that button, you have a blank field. You can click on the Add Tables icon, and it will add your tables here. We need to create relationships between like fields in our database. And so you can either left click and drag these tables over into your design grid, or you can double click and it will add them to your grid. The one thing that I will say is sometimes we get a little click happy and maybe we've entered an extra table. Notice that if we do that, it puts an underscore and a number 1 after that. This is going to skew your results because it's going to be pulling it from the same table but multiple times. So to get rid of a table that you don't need, just right click on it and choose to hide it. And now it's gone from your design grid. The next thing that I will share with you is that you should always make sure that you don't have scroll bars in your tables. So these windows are just like a Microsoft window. You can get the double-headed arrow and you can resize those tables so that you can see the data. You can also click in the title bar area of a window and you can move the windows wherever you want them to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create relationships. And when we're creating our relationships, we want to make sure that we are joining what is called a primary key in a table with what would be considered a foreign key, or some people refer to it as a secondary key in another table. These are our criteria examples for our queries. Let me open up. I'm missing my Skyline. Let me search for that quick. I wonder what I did with it. Oh, I'm sure it's a PDF file. That's why I can't find it. So let's go ahead and we'll minimize this. Let me minimize this for us quickly and see if I can open up the instructions. Here we go. So just to show you the instructions that are in the assignment link, we're going to go ahead and we're going to join or create relationships between like fields. And it says we have to enforce referential integrity and cascade the fields and records. So you'll see your field name in the first column, and then the two tables you're going to use to make the relationship. So we're going to be creating one-to-many relationships, which means that one field in the primary key table relates to many fields in the foreign key table. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize the instruction sheet and pull our database back up. So we're just going to follow the instruction sheet step by step. It says that we are going to join the employee ID in the employees table. So I left click on it and I'm going to join it to the employee ID in the banquets table. Now I want you to make sure, notice that when I left click and drag, I get the not symbol with an arrow with my attachment, and I'm going to hover over employee ID, and when I release it, I'm going to see that it says employee ID and employee ID. If I made a mistake, so let me close the X. If I made a mistake and I was in a hurry and I did a left click and I drag and I just dropped it, it's going to put it wherever you put it. So make sure that you're precise. Employee ID in the employees table to employee ID in the banquets table. Release it. And then it said we want to enforce referential integrity, cascade the fields, cascade the records. What that does is if I add a record in a table, it will add it to any other table that it's joined to, directly or indirectly. The same with deleting. It will delete it from any other table that the record is found in, whether they're joined directly or indirectly. And so we have a one-to-many relationship. Our fields match, so we click Create. Oh, yes, and that message pops up when we did that. Let me pull that back up again. It says that it can't because the banquets table is already in use. You cannot have your tables open when you're trying to create relationships. Therefore, I just need to close the tables. Now when I go to create my relationship, it will allow that creation to occur. And so this is called a join line. Some people call it a relationship line. One field, so one is the primary key, will join to many. So it joins to many. That's the infinity symbol to the employee ID in the banquets field. Again, if you made a mistake, take the tip of your mouse, right click on it, and you can go to edit because maybe you forgot to cascade. So you could go back in and check it and click OK. You could also right click and you can delete a join if you want to, and then it deletes it. So very simple to work with. We're going to go ahead and join our others. So on our instruction sheet it says we're going to use the inventory table and item ID, and we're going to go to item ID in the orders table. So they match, enforce, cascade, cascade, one-to-many, create. Then we're going to do the suppliers to the orders table. We're using supplier ID. So supplier ID to supplier ID, enforce, cascade, cascade, they match, one-to-many, create. We're also going to use that same field, supplier ID, but do it to the inventory table. And I just want you to notice that it doesn't matter if I drag from the primary key field or the foreign key field, it's still going to create that relationship. Fields match, enforce, cascade, cascade, one-to-many, create. And then the last one is we are using the event ID from the events table to join it to event ID in the banquets table. Fields match, enforce, cascade, cascade, one-to-many, and create. Now, when you're looking at these tables, the first thing that becomes evident is that these three go together. They match. These three go together. So what that means is I could pull any field from any one of these tables to create queries, or one field from any of these three. But I cannot pull fields from here and here because none of these tables are joined to any of these tables. And rightfully so, because you're looking at what goes together. And really, banquets, employees, events deals with the banquet itself, whereas suppliers, orders, and inventory deal with the things that you would order for a banquet. The next thing that I'm going to do, I like to clean things up a little bit. I like to be clear in what it is that I'm looking at. So I have a tendency to just move my tables around a little bit so I can see where those join lines go. This isn't something that's required, but I hate when lines are crisscrossing and doing those kinds of things. So I have a tendency to try to clean it up a little bit just so that I understand how things are being joined together. And then we want to make sure that it fits on our 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I'm going to close the Add Tables window. And then under Relationship Design, because we're working with a relationship, notice that we really don't have like an option to save right here. If I were to click on the X to close this, it says, do you want to save the changes to the layout? Yes, I do. Otherwise, why did I create it? But the other thing to note is if I go back into Database Tools and under Relationships, there's this option under Tools called Relationship Report. And so if I click on that to create the relationship report, first of all, notice it gives me the default title and date that it was created, and there's a page number at the bottom, but it's cutting off my tables. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to change from portrait to landscape to see if that fixes it. And it does. So I could like give this to someone so they could see my relationships. I don't see the actual primary keys, but I do see where the 1 is, which would tell somebody that, okay, that's the primary key field. So when I go to close this, yes, I want to save it. It's going to save it with the default name, and then I'm going to click OK. And then when I close that window, now I don't have to remember to go into Database Tools. I can simply click on the Relationships report, and there it is. So the first thing we needed to do was to be able to work with the relationships within our database. So now that we have relationships created in step 1 of our assignment, we are now able to progress to step 2. So I'm going to end this recording and then I will do a new recording for queries.